So I'm here with Mike. Mike's a nurse.
This is true.
Quite a bit of experience, right?
10 years.
10 years of experience. And what specialties have you primarily been working in?
I've worked for 3 years in telemetry, about a year in outpatient endoscopy, and the rest in ICU and neuro ICU.
Okay. So all of that experience has probably shaped your perception on health, life decisions, and the process of development.
Absolutely.
So what would you say is your objective, not subjective, but objective definition of life?
My objective definition of life. I guess my objective definition of life would include being physically alive probably isn't everything. There has to be some quality or purpose to it. You have to be able to interact with your outside environment.
Sure.
So just having a pulse and being able to breathe doesn't imply anything about life. I mean, that's as alive as a plant. But a plant would be able to interact more with the environment than somebody who was in a permanent vegetative state that was never going to come out. So having physical life, and then also you have to be able to be human,
Right.
Interact with your environment.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. So how do you personally define human life?
Higher level thought. What the things that we tend to think separate us from animals. So our ability to have reason and logic, problem solve, interact with each other. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. So there's degrees of functionality involved in both of those definitions,
Yes.
right? Yeah. Where there's interaction and the ability to at least maintain a quality of life.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so in medicine, we kind of define the objective standard of life, or of human life, as just cardiorespiratory function.
Right.
And pretty simply put, I mean, we can't even pronounce somebody clinically dead or in a vegetative state, complete vegetative state, unless there's just brainstem activity maintaining that function, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So, I think most people would think that, the quality of life and functionality would kind of, coexist with an objective definition of life, but medicine hasn't really made it so.
Sure.
Yeah. What's the rationale underlying your considerations for defining life?
I think the rationale behind it is that I don't see really any benefit to somebody living without the capability of interacting with their environment. Why, if we're here for a reason, which who knows what that reason is, but if we're here for a reason, it's certainly not to be something laying in bed, unable to move, unable to interact, unable to bring joy to itself or somebody else, ever. I just don't see what the merit of it is.
Yeah, that totally makes sense to me too. So, what allows patients to have decision-making capacity in regards to healthcare?
What allows them to?
Well,
We kind of view it as an inane right, but aside from that, so long as they're competent, they're enabled to. Yeah.
Sure. So we do a basic assessment, right?
Yeah. So they have to be alert and oriented. They have to know who they are, what's going on, the situation they're in. Yeah.
And that's what grants them the ability to make their own healthcare decisions.
Yeah.
And what we're really talking
Well, they
about.
have it, but it confirms that they have the capability of doing it.
Sure. Yeah, and what we're talking about is something called consent here. And consent is something you gain when either it's legally granted before the age of 18 or when you turn 18 and become an adult, you're able to consent. And then as we age, there's disease processes that can cause us to lose our ability to consent for ourselves.
Yes.
So like some of those are dementia, if you have a traumatic brain injury and you no longer have the ability to at least orient yourself to what's going on around you, then you lose your ability to consent. And then there's congenital abnormalities, like mental retardation, where people are given guardianship or stewardship by another person, granted usually by the state or relation, when they turn 18 years of age because they can't consent for themselves. Right? So when patients lose their decision-making capacity, what happens?
When they lose their decision-making capacity, we go to the next legal kin, which is defined by the state of Arizona.
Sure.
Which would be your spouse, or then, barring that, your parents or your brothers and sisters. But pretty much we look for somebody else who's willing to do it and capable of doing it themselves.
Yeah. And then there's also documents that you can fill out called like medical powers of attorney that would grant a specific individual those rights to making healthcare decisions on your behalf. So what's the ethical importance of carrying out the patient's wishes when the patient lacks decision-making capacity?
Well, I mean, we should always do what we think the patient wants, or whether or not they direct us to do those things specifically through a living will or something to that effect, or if we are having to make a best guess off of it, either as health professionals or as family members. But it's, we're supposed to be protecting them, essentially, protecting what they would want. So we know if somebody was in a coma and they wouldn't want to live like that forever, we should respect that. Maybe it's not what we believe, but if we go, yeah, I know you wouldn't like this, but I'm going to do it anyway, that's essentially saying, everything you thought for yourself and about yourself was wrong.
Sure.
And that's not a very good ethical choice. That's imposing your will on someone else as opposed to allowing them to keep their free will.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the concept we're really talking about here is patient advocacy, which we're really trained to do, from the very start as nurses. I think physicians have quite a bit of training in it as well. And the kind of documentation we're talking about in terms of living wills would also be under advanced medical directives, which you can fill out for free. You can file them in Arizona at least with the state in a database that grants hospitals access to those documents at no cost, which is pretty cool.
Yes.
I've never used the database, but I'm sure social workers probably have access to it.
I think they use it all the time.
Yeah. The only issue you really run into with a advanced directive is it can, and a lot of people don't really understand this, but it can be overwritten.
Yes.
Immediately with a single word, really.
Yes.
And that would be by the person consenting on your behalf. So a good way around that I can contemplate at least would be by having a person that is your medical power of attorney appointed that will specifically carry out your wishes. Because those documents I do not think can be overwritten so quickly. I think it would take a lot of time and maybe a legal battle.
For us to do it?
For anybody to, let's say
Oh,
a
for
family
another
member,
family
spouse
member?
wanted to override your medical power of attorney, I don't think they could accomplish that goal before the decisions are made.
There's essentially no legal basis for it.
Yeah.
You signed a piece of paper giving this person the power to do anything they want.
Sure. Yeah.
That's it.
So it's really important to keep that in mind. And one of the things I've thought about more recently in terms of advanced directives they kind of look cut and dry if you look through them. They're set up kind of like a flow chart, like I want cardiopulmonary resuscitation or I do not. I want intubation or I do not. I want long-term ventilation or I do not. I want tube feedings or I do not. And there's a lot of space to write in your own terminology there or define limitations there. But when a family member is feeling emotional and they're looking at that kind of documentation, I don't think it speaks to them efficiently. And one thing I've talked to a few people about recently is actually writing a letter to your family members and defining what you think life is, the kind of life you want to live, and why your advanced directive is the way it is. I don't know what your thoughts on that would be.
I think that's actually a really good idea. I think that a lot of families are, nobody ever expects these things to happen.
Sure.
It doesn't matter how old you are. And so it's never a good time for it, and you're always caught unaware. And your own life is happening already.
Yeah.
So it's a lot to deal with on top of whatever else you're already dealing with. And
Yeah, absolutely.
nobody ever seems to think that their life is uncomplicated.
Yeah.
So adding this terrible, what people tend to think of as their decision,
Yeah.
to have to either keep somebody on life support or take them off of it into the mix of whatever else is happening in your life is very overwhelming to people.
Absolutely.
So I agree with you. A personal statement really affirming what you want in words that your family will understand in a letter directed to them.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good idea. I think it would simplify things for a lot of families, because a lot of families feel a lot of guilt over following a piece of paper.
Yeah.
Because it's just a piece of paper. It's not their brother or sister or mom and dad. It's a piece of paper.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But a letter would be much more personal.
Yeah, I agree completely.